The Art of War. Thrawn, the Grand Strategist. Chapter 1. The Unknown Regions. Origins of Mithra Ruano-Oda. In the icy silence of the unknown regions, where star charts ended and most civilizations feared to tread, the world of Chilla stood in stoic defiance of the galaxy's chaos. Beneath its frozen surface thrived a society ruled by discipline, logic, and an ancient order few in the wider galaxy even knew existed. It was here, in the subterranean heart of the Chiss Ascendancy, that a brilliant strategist began his journey, a child born not into privilege, but into a system where greatness had to be earned. His name, in full, was Mithra Ruano-Oda, though the galaxy would come to know him by a shortened title that evoked both respect and dread, Thrawn. The Chiss were a species of sharp minds and sharper customs, blue-skinned, red-eyed, reserved to the point of impenetrability. Their culture revered efficiency and logic above all, guided by a strict meritocracy anchored in the authority of the ruling families. Children were raised communally, taught to suppress emotion and embrace analysis. Those with exceptional intelligence were nurtured and advanced through military and academic channels. Thrawn was one such prodigy. From an early age, he displayed a startling capacity not only for absorbing information, but for interpreting it through patterns, context, and intent. Where others solved problems, he anticipated them. Where others followed doctrine, he rewrote it. Though he was not born into the powerful, mighty family, Thrawn's intellect earned him adoption, an uncommon, highly political process that elevated his status but also drew scrutiny. Advancement in the Ascendancy was not merely a matter of achievement, but of navigating a complex web of tradition and power. The Chiss expansionary defense fleet, tasked with safeguarding Ascendancy borders without inviting war, became his proving ground. In stimulated and real scenarios alike, Thrawn demonstrated a grasp of tactical dynamics far beyond his years. He often defeated superior forces by exploiting cultural assumptions or misinterpreted signals. To the elders, he was a weapon of enormous potential, but also a threat to their conservative doctrine. Despite numerous successes, or perhaps because of them, Thrawn eventually clashed with Ascendancy leaders. His doctrine of preemptive strikes, calculated surgical eliminations of threats before they could act, was controversial in a society that prized measured restraint. During a classified encounter with an unidentified and hostile force pressing toward Chiss territory, Thrawn launched a devastating assault without prior authorization. The mission succeeded, the enemy vanished. But so too did Thrawn's favor among the ruling elite. His removal from Ascendancy service was framed as exile, a formal condemnation meant to silence dissent and protect the internal balance of power. In truth, it was a sanctioned maneuver. The Chiss leadership had seen enough to trust in Thrawn's instincts, even if they could not control him. They authorized a covert mission to embed within the Galactic Empire, observe its rise, and evaluate whether it posed a threat or opportunity for the Chiss. Thrawn accepted, not as a punishment but as a calculated next move. On a remote jungle planet near the edge of wild space, the Imperial vessel Strikefast discovered a lone alien in a makeshift encampment surrounded by dismantled probe droids and improvised perimeter traps. The being introduced himself as Thrawn and promptly requested to speak with the Emperor. Fluent in basic, courteous but precise, he offered his insights into Imperial structure and regional threats. Captain Vos Park, struck by Thrawn's composure and apparent brilliance, ordered his transport to Coruscant for evaluation. In the xenophobic heart of the Empire, Thrawn was an anomaly. Most non-humans were denied commissions or eliminated. Yet his timing was impeccable. The Emperor had begun to sense disturbances emanating from the edges of known space, disturbances he could not explain. Thrawn's knowledge of those regions, coupled with his uncanny ability to predict behavior through cultural analysis, intrigued Palpatine. Not only was Thrawn spared, he was enrolled in the Imperial Academy and placed under direct observation by Imperial intelligence. His rise through the ranks was methodical and undeniable. Thrawn mastered ship operations, chain of command, galactic history, and Imperial protocol with speed that unnerved his instructors. His fellow officers resented his presence, dismissing him as an alien curiosity, until they faced him in simulations or war games. In every scenario, Thrawn outmaneuvered them, often by studying the art and design philosophies of their homeworlds. He believed that culture shaped thought, and thought shaped tactics. By examining a species' art, its form, style, rhythm, he could discern how it would fight, how it would retreat, and where its sense of pride or vulnerability lay. Among the earliest real battles under his command was the skirmish over Poln Major, where Thrawn deduced a pirate coalition's tactics based on their graffiti, supply patterns, and weapon modifications. He feigned a retreat, drew them into a minefield, and decimated their fleet without firing more than a third of his available ordnance. Efficiency, clarity, and psychological superiority were his trademarks. As Thrawn's reputation grew, so did fear of his methods. To many Imperials, Thrawn represented the best of what the Empire could be: disciplined, brilliant, ruthless. To others, he was a reminder of everything the Empire claimed to suppress. His presence exposed the fragility of their human supremacist ideology. His victories made their failures visible. Yet, even those who despised him could not deny his effectiveness. Among those who took interest in his career were Tarkin, who respected strategic dominance, and Darth Vader, who sensed something different in the Chiss officer's presence. Unmoved by the Force, but disturbingly prescient. Palpatine, however, saw in Thrawn more than a tool. He saw a mirror, another manipulator, another thinker working toward an empire of order. But where Palpatine used fear, Thrawn used precision. By the end of his second year, Thrawn had achieved a rare status, an alien not merely accepted, but increasingly essential to the Empire's outer campaigns. While others crushed dissidents through brute force, Thrawn dismantled them through knowledge. And always in the shadows of his mind lingered the Ascendancy and the mysterious threats still slumbering in the darkness beyond mapped space. Thrawn had entered the Empire not to serve it, but to use it. And in doing so, he began reshaping its tactics, its thinking, and eventually, its future. Chapter 2. Exile or Mission. The mystery of Thrawn's banishment. Before he ever set foot aboard an Imperial Star Destroyer, before his name was whispered in the ears of governors and moffs across the galaxy, Thrawn's departure from the Chiss Ascendancy was cloaked in contradiction. Officially, he was branded a rogue, exiled for launching an unauthorized attack that defied the measured doctrines of the Chiss expansionary defense fleet. Yet the records left more questions than answers. Why would the Ascendancy dismiss one of its most promising tacticians during a time of rising threats along its borders? Why were the terms of his exile so conveniently structured to place him within the reach of the Galactic Empire? The truth was buried beneath layers of strategic obfuscation, as much for internal Chiss politics as for galactic security. Thrawn had not been exiled in disgrace. He had been sent out as a probe, a weapon unleashed with the Ascendancy's quiet blessing. The ruling families, particularly the Mitt and Erisi, understood the limitations of their isolationist policies. The unknown regions were no longer as empty as the Chiss believed. Whispers of encroaching threats, unmapped civilizations with disturbing technology and unthinkable goals, had reached the highest ranks. And Thrawn, with his unusual blend of audacity and clarity, was the perfect candidate to infiltrate the greater galaxy and gauge what dangers it might hold. He accepted the mission with no hesitation. In truth, he had been preparing for it long before it was sanctioned. He had long argued that the Chiss needed to expand their understanding of the galaxy's power structures. The Republic, and then the nascent Empire, were known to the Chiss only in fragments: stray transmission intercepts, exploratory reports, the occasional refugee or merchant caught in a patrol net. Yet Thrawn understood that an empire like Palpatine's, driven by expansion and autocratic control, would eventually touch the unknown regions. He chose to meet it head-on. His exile was engineered to catch the attention of the right people. A wrecked shuttle placed on an isolated jungle world, traps and deactivated droids laid out with calculated subtlety. An alien himself, alone, prepared to be found but not helpless. When the Imperial light cruiser Strikefast entered the system, the events unfolded as planned. Captain Voss Park, curious and politically sharp, brought Thrawn aboard. The alien spoke basic with minimal accent. He deferred to authority without seeming subservient. He provided critical intelligence on pirate movements in the sector, intelligence that turned out to be accurate. Park was impressed. He notified Coruscant. Thrawn's arrival on Coruscant marked a pivotal moment. While xenophobia had long been institutionalized in the Imperial hierarchy, exceptions could be made. The Empire prized results, and Thrawn's early demonstrations of intelligence and composure earned him an audience far sooner than most expected. The Emperor himself reviewed the reports. He did not need the Force to sense that Thrawn was more than an anomaly. He was a potential instrument, a precision blade to be wielded far from the messy brutality of stormtroopers and Moffs. During their first conversation, Palpatine posed few direct questions. He let silence do the work. Thrawn stood calmly before him, posture perfect, eyes unblinking. When asked why he had come, he answered simply, "To serve the cause of order in a galaxy increasingly defined by chaos." Palpatine, ever the schemer, sensed deeper motives, but that only intrigued him more. He granted Thrawn admission to the Royal Imperial Academy. Within weeks, instructors realized they were dealing with a mind that operated outside traditional frameworks. Thrawn absorbed Imperial protocol, tactical theory, and galactic history with alarming speed. He corrected textbook errors. He proposed alternative campaign strategies to well-established doctrines. In starfighter simulations, he used ambushes no one had considered. In naval exercises, he routed entire simulated fleets using the predictable behavior patterns of his opponent. More importantly, Thrawn began to apply his philosophy of cultural analysis. He studied the uniforms of alien prisoners, dissected the music of separatist colonies, analyzed holosculpture from Moncala. From these he extrapolated their military doctrines, social vulnerabilities, and likely strategies in a crisis. His results were not only accurate, they were uncanny. It was as if he could see through the illusions of civilization directly into the engines that powered their collective behavior. Of course, not everyone welcomed him. Human cadets mocked him openly. Senior officers questioned his loyalty. Even within the Emperor's circle, there were doubts. Willoff Tarkin, already a rising architect of Imperial military policy, saw Thrawn as useful but unpredictable. Isan Izard of Imperial intelligence flagged him as a potential risk. Yet as time went on, Thrawn's battlefield record left little room for denial. In one campaign along the Hydean Way, he led a task force against a resurgent separatist cell that had taken root in a ring of industrial worlds. While other commanders failed to coordinate responses across fragmented star systems, Thrawn mapped the supply routes, tracked cultural sympathies, and used staged propaganda leaks to bait the enemy into exposing themselves. When the cell finally struck, his forces were already waiting. The victory was surgical and demoralizing for the insurgents. It was also efficient, achieved with minimal civilian casualties, a rarity in the Empire. As his success grew, Thrawn began building a cadre of officers who valued intellect over brutality. One of them was Eli Vanto, a logistics specialist who had once served as Thrawn's translator. Thrawn recognized Vanto's potential and made him his personal aide, teaching him Chiss strategy, art analysis, and galactic politics. The two formed a bond that surprised many. It was the beginning of a trend that would define Thrawn's leadership. Loyalty earned through merit, not fear. Meanwhile, whispers of his past continued to circulate. Those who dug deep enough found inconsistencies in his exile. Rumors surfaced of classified Chiss transmissions. Some claimed he had contacts with agents who operated beyond known space. Others dismissed it as paranoia, but Thrawn never commented. He allowed people to believe what they wished, so long as it did not interfere with his work. His first audience with Darth Vader came during an operation to track down rogue Jedi artifacts. Vader, suspicious and intense, tested Thrawn's resolve, both with words and veiled threats. Thrawn, calm as ever, deferred to Vader's rank while subtly demonstrating his own superiority in strategic foresight. Vader hated him for it, yet Palpatine valued their dynamic. One fought with fire, the other with frost. Between them, the Empire had every kind of blade. By the time Thrawn was formally promoted to Admiral, his name had already become legend among insurgents and warlords. They feared his insight more than his fleet. He didn't just destroy rebels, he unraveled their causes, co-opted their allies and left their ideologies in ruins. To many within the rebellion, Thrawn was more dangerous than any superweapon. He turned their strengths into weaknesses, their convictions into liabilities. Still, the mystery of his exile lingered. Was he truly loyal to the Empire? Or was he playing a deeper game? Even within the ranks of his most trusted officers, the question remained. Thrawn never spoke of Scylla, nor of the Ascendancy, but in his private chambers he kept artifacts, Chiss art, Chiss instruments, Chiss tactical journals, hidden behind coded barriers. His mission, it seemed, had never ended. He served the Empire, but in the shadows of his mind he still watched the borders of the unknown regions, still listened for the silence that might one day break. Whether as an agent of the Chiss or the architect of his own empire, Thrawn remained a strategist first, and in every move he made, he calculated not just for the next battle, but for the next era. Chapter 3. First Contact with the Empire. The jungle moon where Strikefast found him was neither a trap nor an accident. Thrawn had chosen it carefully. Its remoteness guaranteed minimal traffic. The flora, dense, carnivorous, difficult to navigate, ensured any approach would be cautious. From a thicket of observation blinds, Thrawn had monitored dozens of orbital flybys for weeks. The arrival of the Imperial vessel was not a coincidence. It was a signal his patience had paid off. The boarding party that found him initially mistook him for a castaway, a survivor of a wrecked alien freighter. But the perimeter security, the deactivated surveillance drones, the precisely laid food storage, none of it aligned with desperation. Captain Vos Park, seasoned and politically astute, recognized the anomaly. The alien had surrendered without resistance, addressed them in basic, and requested an audience with the Emperor. It was not a plea, it was a maneuver. Aboard Strikefast, Thrawn quickly adapted to the sterile routines of the Imperial vessel. He mapped its security blind spots in hours. He memorized the ranks, names, and behavioral patterns of every crewman he met. Most officers dismissed him, some ridiculed his appearance, but Park, intrigued, arranged for the alien to be questioned under observation. The reports that followed startled both the captain and his superiors. Thrawn provided accurate assessments of pirate activity in 3 nearby sectors. He explained how fuel raiding patterns corresponded with the behavior of a specific former separatist warlord operating in exile. He spoke of the unknown regions not as myth, but with clarity, offering navigational corrections, warning of anomalies, even describing entire civilizations beyond the Empire's borders. The information was too detailed to ignore. When word reached Coruscant, the decision to bring Thrawn to the capital was swift. The Emperor, always searching for the exceptional, ordered his transport to the palace complex. There, in the shadow of towering obsidian spires and surrounded by crimson-robed guards, Thrawn was escorted to the Imperial throne room. Palpatine, seated in contemplative silence, regarded him with a gaze that pierced through most men. But Thrawn held it. Palpatine asked no questions at first. He let the silence speak. Thrawn eventually broke it, not with supplication, but with analysis. He laid out a theory of galactic instability. The collapse of the Republic had not ended chaos, merely delayed it. Palpatine's new order was too young to recognize the threats brewing beyond the Outer Rim. Civilizations unlike any in known space were watching, calculating. The Empire needed someone who could see them coming. Palpatine listened. He sensed no force signature in the alien, but something else lingered, a mind that worked in curves rather than lines, a desire for order, an understanding of power not rooted in ideology, but in probability. The Emperor saw not a servant, but a tool. Precise, unbound, useful. He arranged for Thrawn to be placed in the Royal Imperial Academy of Coruscant under direct supervision. Most aliens were forbidden from such posts, but Thrawn was granted an exception. Publicly framed as a gesture of the Emperor's magnanimity, privately it was an experiment. Could a non-human master the ways of the Empire? Could he even outshine its officers? At the Academy, Thrawn began again. Uniforms, protocol, chain of command, all learned within weeks. He excelled in tactical simulations, outperforming decorated instructors. In fleet maneuvers, he exposed structural weaknesses in Imperial doctrines long considered flawless. When reprimanded for acting unpredictably, he responded with data. Every decision was rooted in logic, every maneuver calculated for maximum impact with minimal cost. He was not merely a warrior, he was an analyst, a student of culture. To him, a civilization's military choices could be understood through its art, its architecture, its patterns of speech. He studied hollow paintings from Alderaan, operas from Chandrila, sculpture from Bothui. From each he drew conclusions, not aesthetic but strategic. An art piece that favored sharp, aggressive strokes implied a society that attacked in bursts. Harmonious compositions meant layered tactics. Chaos in design reflected instability. He rarely erred. His instructors, initially dismissive, grew wary. He began attracting the attention of high command observers, including Colonel Wolf Yularen, who later became a key player in the Imperial Security Bureau. Yularen saw in Thrawn not just tactical brilliance, but an edge the Empire sorely lacked, the ability to think beyond human arrogance. Not all were convinced. Grand Moff Tarkin, though respectful of results, regarded Thrawn as a wild card, too independent, too alien. Others feared what he represented, that superiority was not exclusive to humanity. Even Darth Vader, who sensed no force alignment within the Chiss, warned the Emperor against trusting someone who operated beyond emotion. Still, the results could not be denied. Thrawn's first live engagement during a skirmish in the Sisar Run resulted in the total disbanding of a Hutt-affiliated raiding fleet. He anticipated their staging points based on intercepted music broadcasts, music that, in his words, betrayed a desire for pattern without discipline. He then used comms interference to make their retreat appear as an imperial trap, causing them to scatter into an ambush. Not a single tie was lost. His unique style soon earned him a reputation among junior officers. Some admired him, others resented him. He ignored both. Instead, he began cultivating talent, selecting aides and crew based on potential rather than politics. One such officer was Eli Vanto, a logistics officer from Lysatra. Vanto had been tasked with assisting in language translation, but soon found himself drawn into Thrawn's orbit. The Chiss saw in him an analytical mind, untapped by the rigid hierarchy. Under Thrawn's tutelage, Vanto became more than a clerk. He became a strategist. Behind every deployment, Thrawn made notes, files on species, cultures, dialects. Every battle was a puzzle, every opponent an equation. To him, the galaxy was not chaos, but order misunderstood. And through it all, he kept his own counsel. The name Mith-Ronuodo never left his lips on Coruscant. The Chiss Ascendancy was never mentioned. But deep within the encrypted sections of his private files, coded in Chiss symbology, were maps, not of the core worlds, but of the unknown regions. Threads of activity, scouting reports, names that did not exist in any Imperial registry. Thrawn had not abandoned his people. Nor had he surrendered to the Empire. He was gathering data, learning their strengths, measuring their weaknesses, and waiting. Waiting for the time when both empires, Chiss and Galactic, might need each other to survive. Chapter 4. Rise through Imperial ranks. There was no parade, no thunderous applause, no declaration in the holonet when Thrawn was promoted from Commodore to Admiral. The ascension was methodical, an inevitable calculation in a bureaucracy that, despite its xenophobic traditions, was built to reward effectiveness. And effectiveness, in Thrawn's case, had become a matter not of debate, but of record. Every operation under his command bore the same hallmarks: minimal casualties, decisive victory, and an uncanny ability to anticipate the opponent's intent long before the first turbo laser fired. By the time the Emperor bestowed upon him the rank of Grand Admiral, one of only 12 in the entire Imperial Navy, the uniform of white and the golden rank insignia were already synonymous with fear among the Empire's enemies. From the core worlds to the mid-rim, from pirate dens in the Gordian Reach to Hutt-controlled sectors, Thrawn's name carried weight, not because of brutality, but because of precision. He destroyed not only fleets, but ideologies, unraveling the cultural assumptions of his foes and turning their identities against them. His flagship, the Chimera, became a symbol of this surgical dominance. A heavily modified Imperial I-class Star Destroyer, it carried not only the standard complement of stormtroopers and TIE squadrons, but entire chambers filled with alien art, cultural archives and specimen storage, tools for Thrawn's strategic study. He surrounded himself with officers hand-picked for their intellect rather than their lineage, even when Imperial High Command questioned his loyalty. Still disturbed by the anomaly of a non-human in a position of such authority, the Emperor protected him. The key to Thrawn's rise was not just his victories, but the manner in which he framed them. He spoke not of conquest, but of stability. He argued that the Empire's primary flaw was its over-reliance on fear. Fear compelled compliance, but not loyalty. The galaxy could not be controlled forever through the boot and blaster. Instead, Thrawn implemented reconstruction programs in conquered worlds. He stabilized trade in former separatist sectors. He permitted cultural traditions to persist where they posed no strategic threat. To many in the upper echelons of Imperial command, this approach bordered on treason. But Palpatine, ever the tactician, saw the deeper value. Thrawn could do what Vader and Tarkin could not: win wars without turning every world into rubble. Where Vader burned, Thrawn converted. Where Tarkin built superweapons, Thrawn built networks. His clashes with Darth Vader became legendary behind closed doors. The two could not have been more different. Vader ruled through fear and dominance, while Thrawn preferred understanding and indirect manipulation. In one operation involving the recovery of an ancient Jedi relic on Batuu, Thrawn's calculated infiltration of a cultic sect had secured the artifact with no casualties. Vader's alternative strategy would have left the settlement in ashes. The tension between them was palpable, though rarely voiced. Vader loathed Thrawn's calmness, his ability to deflect even the darkest threats with logic, and Thrawn, ever perceptive, treated Vader as both rival and curiosity. Yet despite their philosophical opposition, they worked together when ordered, bound by their loyalty to the Emperor and an understanding that power, above all, required preservation. It was during these joint operations that Thrawn gleaned insights into the shadowy world of Sith influence within the Empire. Though never Force-sensitive himself, he deduced the true nature of Palpatine's rule, one driven not only by politics and economics, but by mysticism and terror. Meanwhile, Thrawn's reputation among the rebellion grew into myth. He rarely appeared on the front lines, but when he did, his presence signaled doom. Rebel spies reported entire cells vanishing after a single analysis of their intercepted communications. Starfighter aces whispered that Thrawn could predict their maneuvers before they launched. On one occasion, he deduced the location of a hidden rebel base simply by analyzing the regional popularity of a particular Mon Calamari poet. His opponents learned, often too late, that their beliefs were their weaknesses. He predicted that the rebellion's emphasis on decentralization would lead to communication breakdowns. He exploited their humanitarian efforts by faking refugee convoys seeded with tracking devices. He dissected their ideology with surgical precision, reducing passionate resistance to predictable patterns of behavior. Yet for all his cunning, Thrawn remained enigmatic. His quarters aboard the Chimera were Spartan, save for carefully arranged sculptures and paintings, trophies of his psychological warfare. He spoke rarely of his own past, and when he did, it was through parables about alien philosophies or abstract discussions on power and duty. Only Elivanto, still serving faithfully as his chief aide, understood fragments of the deeper story. The Thrawn's service to the Empire was not rooted in loyalty, but in strategy. For behind every operation, every maneuver, was the looming spectre of the unknown regions. Thrawn knew what the rest of the galaxy refused to see, that something far worse than rebels or separatists was watching. In the vacuum left by Palpatine's singular obsession with domination, dark entities stirred, entities that respected neither codes nor treaties. He documented gravitational anomalies, mass disappearances, and ancient star charts whose stellar alignments no longer matched reality. The Chiss Ascendancy had encountered such threats. The Grisk, though rarely named aloud, were one such menace. A species of manipulators and enslavers whose tactics made even the Empire seem noble by comparison. Thrawn's rise through Imperial ranks was not ambition, it was armor. He was building a shield for the galaxy, one battle group at a time. As the Death Star consumed resources and attention, Thrawn voiced concerns about its strategic efficiency. A single superweapon, he argued, created a single point of failure. The rebellion would only grow more desperate, more unified under such tyranny. But his warnings were dismissed. Palpatine, blinded by his belief in fear's supremacy, would not be swayed. Still, Thrawn continued his work. He expanded his reach into the mid-rim. He built outposts and listening stations. He oversaw the creation of elite stormtrooper divisions trained not in brute force, but in strategic improvisation. He elevated alien officers, quietly, discreetly, into positions of command, observing their effectiveness in the shadows of the Empire's human-first policies. To the galaxy, he was the Grand Admiral. To the rebellion, a demon of logic. To the Emperor, a useful tool. But in truth, Thrawn remained what he had always been, a sentinel, watching the stars, listening for the silence, preparing for the day when war would come, not from rebellion or corruption, but from the cold, calculating darkness of the unknown. And when that day came, he knew the Empire would be unprepared, unless he prepared it himself. Chapter 5. Encounters with Rebels and the Ghost Crew. In the waning years of the Galactic Empire, as discontent smoldered across the mid and outer rims, a new and troubling element rose among the embers of insurgency: Phoenix Cell. Their effectiveness, subtle coordination, and unorthodox tactics drew the attention of several Moffs and sector governors. Raids on supply convoys, the sabotage of fuel depots, and the high-profile prisoners plagued the Empire's regional strongholds. Especially in the Lothal system, was here that Grand Admiral Thrawn was dispatched, not merely to crush another band of rebels, but to understand them. The assignment suited him. Lothal was rich in military manufacturing and strategically located near the Hydian Way, but what interested Thrawn most was the artistry of the insurgents. Their leader, a Twi'lek named Hera Syndulla, was a seasoned pilot whose flair in evasive maneuvers spoke of a methodical mind. Her crew was diverse: a Mandalorian demolitions expert, a Lasat warrior monk, a slicer droid, a sarcastic astromech, and a boy. That last one intrigued Thrawn the most. Ezra Bridger, the name emerged again and again in intercepted transmissions. A former street rat turned Force-sensitive rebel, his improvisational tactics bore resemblance to ancient Lothali guerrilla strategies, and his crude yet evocative street murals bore psychological insight far beyond his years. Thrawn began collecting images of Bridger's graffiti. Where the Empire saw vandalism, he saw a map of the insurgents' ideology. Colors, shapes, placement, every stroke contained rebellion, yes, but also a yearning for structure. Thrawn would exploit that contradiction. To combat Phoenix Cell, Thrawn enacted a strategy of calculated escalation. Rather than obliterate their assets immediately, he tightened supply chains across the sector, forcing the rebels into predictable, desperate moves. He allowed minor victories, apparent lapses in security that baited the cell into overextension. His goal was not annihilation. It was comprehension. And from comprehension, control. Lothal's imperial garrison under Governor Ariinda Price had grown complacent and corrupt. Thrawn changed that. He restructured command hierarchies, brought in elite Death Trooper squads, and reorganized the TIE Defender project, a next-generation starfighter far superior to the flimsy TIEs the Empire mass-produced. Where the Death Star symbolized brute terror, Thrawn's Defender represented tactical superiority, mobility, firepower, and shielding, all within the hands of disciplined pilots. But not all within the Empire shared his vision. Tarkin and Krennic, obsessed with Project Stardust, saw the TIE Defender as an expensive detour. Thrawn, undeterred, fought to secure its funding, arguing that a superweapon could be destroyed in a single stroke, as the Empire would learn in time. The Defender, by contrast, could multiply victories across countless systems. While the Senate debated, Thrawn refined. His confrontations with Phoenix Cell grew more personal. Each clash provided data. How Ezra responded under pressure, the tactical role Hera preferred, Sabina Wren's use of Mandalorian codes. Thrawn eventually acquired a piece of Sabina's artwork, a painted training helmet. It occupied his private collection not for sentiment, but because it revealed her emotional volatility and symbolic thinking, both weaknesses in prolonged engagements. The game came to a head when Thrawn deciphered the rebels' plans to attack the Lothal Imperial complex and destroy the TIE Defender factory. Anticipating their infiltration routes and ship modifications, he laid a trap with surgical precision. The battle was fierce. He captured Hera. He studied her resolve, her grief after the death of Kanan Jarrus. Another Jedi, long hidden, now revealed. Even in defeat, she fascinated him. Thrawn nearly broke them. Phoenix Cell teetered on collapse. Yet something unexpected occurred. Unity through grief. Ezra, young and untempered, began taking bolder steps, actions that mirrored Thrawn's own strategic thinking. It was a rare moment of admiration. In the boy's pain, there was growth. In his sacrifice, purpose. The final confrontation unfolded not in deep space or planetary orbit, but within the capital dome of Lothal itself. As Thrawn's fleet orbited above, preparing to bombard the city, Ezra offered surrender. Not with blasters drawn, but with a quiet resolve. It was not submission. It was a trap, one Thrawn, despite all his preparation, did not anticipate. The purulent, giant, hyper-capable creatures of legend erupted from hyperspace, disabling the fleet and ensnaring the Chimera. The creatures, guided by Ezra through the Force, wrapped Thrawn's command ship in their massive tendrils and jumped to hyperspace, taking Thrawn and Ezra with them. No one knew where. The bridge fell silent as starlines streaked past. No coordinates, no explanation. Gone. To the Empire, it was a mystery. The fleet's commander, the greatest tactical mind in Imperial history, vanished without a trace in the middle of a routine suppression mission. The official record said the Chimera was destroyed in the Lothal system. Privately, few believed Thrawn had truly perished. Rumors swirled in Outer Rim cantinas and high command war rooms alike. Some said Thrawn had orchestrated the entire event, sacrificing his command to escape the Empire's growing collapse. Others whispered of ancient threats from beyond the galactic veil, and speculated Thrawn had returned to confront them, finally free of Imperial constraints. What was certain, Lothor was liberated, and the Empire lost one of its most irreplaceable minds. Unlike the boastful Moffs or the mystical Sith, Thrawn left behind no cult, no doctrine, no scorched path of terror, only questions. And art. The Ghost crew would speak of him in time as both nemesis and strange mirror. Hera admitted to admiring his intellect, if not his allegiance. Sabina continued painting, but never again in the same colors. And Ezra? No one knew. His fate was now bound to Thrawn's. Somewhere, in a distant corner of the galaxy, the Grand Admiral observed, measured, waited. He had not failed, he had merely adapted. Chapter 6. Return from the Unknown. The Chimera had not been destroyed. It had not drifted into a star or been picked apart by pirates. It had been taken, ripped from Lothal's skies by living hyperspace-capable beings and hurled into the deep reaches of the galaxy, far beyond charted hyperspace lanes. Somewhere in the expanse of the unknown regions, where nava-computers failed and stars behaved like ghosts, Thrawn endured. His survival was not an act of luck. It was the culmination of years of preparation. The Purgil's intervention may have been unpredictable, but Thrawn had studied the unknown regions since his days with the Chiss. He understood that chaos ruled here, that even gravity could betray the unwary. The Chimera, battered and adrift, became a lifeboat in a cosmic sea devoid of charts. Its systems failed one by one, but discipline remained. Under Thrawn's command, the surviving crew maintained order. Ezra Bridger, too, survived. Held under guard, questioned, studied. Thrawn did not hate him. On the contrary, he respected Ezra's ingenuity. The boy had made a choice most Imperials couldn't fathom, sacrifice over revenge. It was the same brand of cold calculation Thrawn admired, even if it stemmed from altruism rather than strategy. The relationship between Thrawn and Ezra during their exile was shaped by necessity. Neither could afford hatred. In the vast, unknowable darkness of their isolation, both became witnesses to strange phenomena, stars that sang, derelict fleets, worlds consumed by gravitational anomalies. Here, in the forgotten graveyard of galactic history, Thrawn re-encountered elements of the Grix's mysterious, manipulative enemies he had long warned of, and now, confronted by their presence in real time, he began to understand the true scale of their threat. Ezra, for his part, learned from Thrawn, not by choice, but by exposure. Trapped in close quarters with the Grand Admiral, he saw not just a warlord, but a curator, an analyst, a man who thought in centuries rather than months. They debated history, art, rebellion, and control. Ezra grew to understand that Thrawn's evil was not born from cruelty. It was from conviction, a conviction that order was worth the cost. When rescue finally came, it did not arrive on a New Republic ship, nor was it orchestrated by the remains of the Empire. It was the Chiss Ascendancy who found Thrawn. Following faint traces and old contingency codes embedded in the Chimera's fading transponder beacons, their arrival was not triumphant. It was silent, clinical, strategic. Thrawn returned to his people not as an exile, but as a proven sentinel. His time in the Galactic Empire had been a reconnaissance mission of historic proportions. He had studied not just the Empire's technology and tactics, but its flaws, its obsession with domination, its vulnerability to rebellion, and its blindness to external threats. The Chiss Council, or Syndicure, debated how to use this information. Some saw Thrawn as tainted by the arrogance of human civilization. Others viewed him as the Ascendancy's last best hope. The Grix threat was no longer a myth, it was real. They infiltrated societies, dismantled cohesion, and enslaved through fear and suggestion. They were the enemy Thrawn had always been preparing for. And so, with quiet consent from the highest levels of Chiss command, Thrawn returned once more to the galaxy, not to serve the Empire, fractured and leaderless, but to prepare the galaxy against the coming storm. His re-emergence shocked what remained of Imperial loyalists. Some believed him dead, others thought him a myth. Yet there he was, white uniform gleaming, eyes glowing with cold purpose. He did not rejoin the war for nostalgia. He re-entered it as a chessboard, one in which he could manipulate the remnants of Imperial power to build a shield against galactic annihilation. Alliances were made in shadows, mercenaries hired, fleets repaired. The Chimera, though scarred, was reborn. To the galaxy, his return was the signal of something darker stirring. Rumors spread of a shadow fleet gathering in the unknown regions, of an Imperial force not driven by tyranny, but by survival. Some in the New Republic mocked the tales. Others, veterans of Lothal, remembered Thrawn's gaze and knew better. Thrawn did not declare war. He simply waited. Moved pieces, calculated. He knew that chaos would return, that the Republic was as vulnerable to collapse as the Empire had been. He understood civilizations did not fall from the outside, they crumbled from within. And so he watched, listened, and prepared, not to conquer, to defend. But in Thrawn's logic, defense could be indistinguishable from domination. Chapter 7, Strategies and Shadows, Thrawn's Philosophy of Control. Thrawn did not see war as a contest of brute strength, nor did he regard politics as the end game of civilization. To him, all things, power, belief, action, were functions of systems. The success of a campaign or the collapse of an empire could be traced not merely to the weapons used or the leaders appointed, but to the unspoken assumptions behind every decision made. It was this framework of thought, this analytical philosophy, that allowed him to navigate and manipulate the galaxy's most complex crises. At the core of Thrawn's strategy was cultural comprehension. Most Imperial officers viewed alien species as inferior or at best exotic, but Thrawn treated every culture as a cipher, a code to be broken. Through study of their art, rituals, music and architecture, he gleaned insights into how they thought, what they feared, and how they would act under pressure. He once neutralized a Zygerian insurgency not with orbital bombardment, but by returning a stolen ceremonial mask their warbands believed was sacred, convincing them the Empire honored their traditions, while secretly reassigning their tribal leadership through puppet intermediaries. A show of respect, yes, but also total control. For Thrawn, fear had limited utility. It created resistance and eventual revolt. Respect, earned through competence and subtle manipulation, yielded deeper compliance. This view put him at odds with many within the Empire who preferred scorched earth methods or overwhelming displays of might. Grand Moff Tarkin's Tarkin doctrine of ruling through fear of force was, in Thrawn's eyes, ultimately self-defeating. One could not suppress the galaxy forever. Better to engineer a system where rebellion never took root in the first place. He documented thousands of psychological profiles over his career, not just of enemies, but allies, Imperial commanders, sector governors, even Sith Lords. He had, in private, detailed assessments of Vader's underlying motivations, weaknesses, and suppressed identity. He deduced the existence of the Jedi Order's downfall long before many Imperials even knew the term Order 66. His insight into the Emperor's obsession with ancient Sith relics led him to question the wisdom of placing galactic destiny in the hands of mystical dogma. Yet he never openly challenged it. Thrawn's genius was in adaptation. When the Death Star was prioritized over the TIE Defender project, he did not protest to the point of rebellion. Instead, he altered his own strategies, compensating for the political tide by pushing his innovations elsewhere. Experimental command structures, clandestine academies for officers trained outside of Coruscant's dogmatic military doctrine, and black site intelligence units that studied rebel philosophy and grassroots propaganda. He recognized early the importance of perception. Thrawn made himself a symbol, a calculated icon. His white uniform stood in sharp contrast to the drab greys and blacks of the Imperial Navy. His red eyes and measured cadence marked him as otherworldly, a presence. It unsettled foes and reassured subordinates. To the common officer he was a mystery, but one that delivered results. Success masked origin. Few dared question his Chiss bloodline once entire sectors were pacified under his command with minimal violence. Yet he was not immune to failure. His ability to analyze emotion did not mean he shared it, and this gap created blind spots. Ezra Bridger's sacrifice at Lothal was a miscalculation, not because Thrawn didn't foresee the possibility, but because he undervalued the lengths to which idealism could be weaponized. Emotion, for all its volatility, had strategic momentum. It was the very fuel of the rebellion, and while Thrawn dissected it with precision, he never truly felt it. This would be both his strength and his flaw. In exile, this flaw gnawed at him. Among the Chiss he was revered, but still considered distant. His detachment from ideology made him a perfect strategist, but an incomplete leader. And yet, even that was part of his design. Thrawn did not seek worship or titles. He sought preparation. Every move in the wider galaxy, every war waged or prevented, was a calibration for what was coming. He believed the galaxy was heading for a convergence, a moment when the institutions of old would collapse, and something far more ancient, far more dangerous would emerge from the unknown. To the Jedi, this might be called prophecy. To Thrawn, it was pattern recognition. His return to the known galaxy, while quiet, was deliberate. He reconnected with surviving Imperial warlords, rebuilt the remnants of loyalist fleets, and redirected resources not toward conquest, but toward stabilization of key sectors. He viewed the New Republic with measured concern, not as an enemy, but as a fragile structure unprepared for the existential threats it might one day face. In private monologues recorded aboard the Chimera, he mused about galactic fate, not in spiritual terms, but in cycles. Civilizations rise, stagnate, collapse. He studied the Rakata, the infinite empire, the fall of the Jedi and the transformation of Republic into empire. To Thrawn, history was a loop, not a line. His role then was not to break the loop, but to nudge its trajectory, to prolong order long enough that the next collapse would not mean annihilation. He trained officers in this mindset, often in secret. These disciples, many of alien descent or fringe origin, were taught not only starship command, but anthropology, psychology, and comparative theology. He believed a fleet could not rule the stars if it didn't understand them. Many of these students would later appear in far-flung parts of the galaxy, implementing stabilization programs under his indirect guidance. And so, while other warlords bickered over territory, while force cults clashed over relics, and while the Republic sank deeper into bureaucracy, Thrawn operated in the shadows, quietly directing the galaxy away from entropy. One calculation at a time. But he knew his control had limits, and he knew that one day control would fail. The question that haunted him was not whether he would win, but whether he could delay the inevitable long enough for someone else to. Someone who understood the stakes. Someone who could see the board as he did. Chapter 8. Alliances and Betrayals. Thrawn and the Fractured Empire. The Galactic Empire, once a monolith of control radiating from Coruscant, had shattered into embers. With the death of Emperor Palpatine at Endor and the catastrophic defeat at Jakku, the military machine that had subdued thousands of star systems fragmented into isolated warlords, rogue admirals, and self-proclaimed moffs. Each claimed legitimacy, resources, territory. Each hoped to be the true heir. Into this chaos, Grand Admiral Thrawn returned, not as a claimant but as a strategist. The fractured state of the Imperial Remnant was precisely what he had foreseen during his exile. Yet he did not seek to rebuild the Empire in its former image. He sought to repurpose its bones. Thrawn initiated contact with the remaining coherent command structures, figures like Admiral Ray Sloane, a disciplined and forward-thinking officer who had fled to the unknown regions with a remnant fleet. She was among the few who did not treat Thrawn's return as a threat. Together they formed a mutual understanding, order over ego, survival over glory. Thrawn provided strategic counsel and access to Chiss mapping data. Sloane offered fleets, experienced officers, and legitimacy. But trust among Imperials was rare. Others, such as Fleet Admiral Gallius Rax, had no interest in sharing power. Rax, a secret acolyte of the Sith's contingency, sought to implode the Empire deliberately, ensuring that only the strongest, most loyal would survive. His views clashed directly with Thrawn's ethos. Rax saw disorder as purification. Thrawn saw it as a disease. It was through subtle proxies and counterintelligence networks that Thrawn worked to undercut such nihilistic ambition. He did not expose Rax. He allowed him to burn. Among the splinters of the Imperial machine, Thrawn sought to build alliances with those who still possessed discipline. He restructured splinter fleets into decentralized strike groups, rotating command based on mission profiles rather than rank. It was a Chiss concept, foreign to most Imperial minds, but one that adapted better to the unpredictable nature of the post-Endor galaxy. He also turned to the Outer Rim warlords, not to dominate them, but to harness their resources. He offered stability in exchange for autonomy. On worlds like Munil, Instfondor, and Bastion, he established new codes of conduct, emphasizing civilian protection, trade restoration, and cultural autonomy under Imperial protection. He framed it not as tyranny, but as partnership. Slowly, star systems, weary of rebellion and exhausted by pirate raids, began accepting his authority, not out of fear, but efficiency. But not all welcomed him. Many viewed Thrawn's alien heritage as disqualifying, a deeply ingrained xenophobia that lingered even in the dying breaths of Imperial ideology. Former ISB commanders like Colonel Yularen's protege saw him as a traitor to human dominance. These detractors attempted assassination, sabotage, and sedition. Thrawn countered not with execution but exile. He let his enemies watch as his sectors prospered, as piracy declined, as shipyards came back online. His success outlived their hatred. Perhaps his most dangerous maneuver came with the formation of the Shadow Council, an unofficial coalition of remnant leaders. While not public, the council coordinated defenses, supply lines, and military efforts under a shared doctrine. Thrawn didn't rule it, he merely orchestrated its meetings, fed its intelligence, and let others believe they held power. His influence permeated through silence. During this time, he made contact with enigmatic forces that had survived the Emperor's hidden legacies. From ancient Sith cults like the Prophets of the Dark Side to the remnants of the Inquisitorius, Thrawn studied them, weighed them. He never adopted their beliefs, but he understood their utility. When he employed Force-sentencidal operatives, it was never as warriors, but as instruments of fear, shock tactics, misinformation, controlled encounters that made enemies question the limits of his reach. He kept the Chiss Ascendancy informed, though not always truthfully. He shared select data on galactic military realignments, resource flows, and hyperspace anomalies. In return, he received access to navigators, force-sensitive Chiss children known as Skywalkers, who helped him traverse unstable lanes. It was a mutual transaction, never an alliance. The Ascendancy remained distant, watching, wary of how much Thrawn had adopted from the humans he once called primitive. Despite his composure, Thrawn wrestled with the paradox of Imperial strength. Its greatest achievements came from uniformity, yet its greatest vulnerability was that very same lack of diversity. He had seen the rebellion succeed not because of firepower, but because of adaptability, species, cultures, philosophies. Each added a layer of unpredictability. The Empire had tried to extinguish this chaos. Thrawn instead tried to categorize and weaponize it. And then there was the emerging presence of a new threat, whispers of the First Order. He was not blind to the rise of Snoke, a shadowy figure manipulating elements from beyond the galactic fringe. Thrawn recognized the signs: centralized command, cult-like loyalty, hyper-militarization. But unlike his fellow Imperials, Thrawn viewed the First Order with suspicion, not reverence. He saw them as reckless, driven by emotional zealotry rather than measured governance. He kept his distance, monitoring them through intermediaries. When approached with offers of allegiance, he declined. The First Order sought domination. Thrawn sought preparation. He believed the galaxy needed a stabilizing influence, not another tyrant. And though he may have worn the uniform of a Grand Admiral, his loyalty was never to the Empire. It was to order, to balance, and to survival. In the years that followed, Thrawn's sectors remained quiet, prosperous, efficient. He became a ghost story among New Republic officers, a phantom warlord with strange tactics and alien loyalties. But to those under his watch, he was a guardian of structure, neither hero nor villain, simply necessary. The fractured empire would never rise again. Thrawn accepted that, but from its ruins he crafted a bulwark, not for conquest, but for what lay in the stars beyond. Because Thrawn knew better than anyone, the galaxy's greatest threat had yet to reveal itself. Chapter 9. Legacy and Influence. Thrawn's Enduring Shadow. Legacy in the galaxy was often shaped not by one's victories, but by the echoes they left behind. For Thrawn, who had always moved beneath the surface of galactic events, it was not statues or parades that marked his presence. It was doctrines, strategies, and the altered paths of those who came after him. In the decades following his campaigns, both the New Republic and the emerging First Order would be shaped in subtle, often unacknowledged ways by his legacy. In the archives of the New Republic's military academies, simulations modeled after Thrawn's engagements at Lothal and Baton became standard curriculum. Officers who had never faced him spoke of his tactics as if he were a living ghost, warning against underestimating commanders who didn't rely on brute force. His strategic analysis of insurgencies, particularly his ability to predict where cells would emerge before they acted, was studied by intelligence operatives and counterinsurgency specialists across the Corps. In the backrooms of Chandrila and later Hosnian Prime, his name was often raised as an example of what the Empire might have become, an argument posed not to glorify tyranny, but to highlight how dangerous intelligence and discipline could be when unmoored from democracy. Some senators feared the return of such minds more than they feared another Death Star. Among former Imperials, however, Thrawn's name inspired something different: reverence. In sectors where his influence remained strongest, worlds like Relvara, Procopia, and parts of the Outer Rim where his reconstruction efforts had taken hold, he was remembered as the last true leader of the Empire, a warlord not driven by ego or cruelty, but by cold, careful design. To them, he was a philosopher-commander, one whose methods had created stability without genocide, prosperity without populism. And yet, his legacy was not without consequence. Elements of the First Order, particularly those shaped by the more analytical minds of the former Imperial Navy, had studied Thrawn's doctrines extensively. While figures like Hux preferred bluster and spectacle, others in the officer corps, including Captain Kennedy and later strategic AI models, drew from Thrawn's writings and simulations. His tactics were imitated, though never equal. Unknown to most, Thrawn had even influenced resistance strategy. Leia Organa, wary of patterns repeating, commissioned intelligence units to dissect his campaigns in the Outer Rim. The idea that a strategist of his caliber might return, or worse, have successors trained in his philosophy, haunted her more than any Starkiller base. She had once fought against Grand Moff Tarkin's doctrine of fear, but it was Thrawn's doctrine of reason that chilled her most. And then there were the shadows beyond the known galaxy, the Chiss, the Grisk, and other ancient powers lurking in the dark. In this realm, Thrawn's legacy was not one of politics or war, but of guardianship. Within the Ascendancy, his name became controversial. Some saw him as a traitor who had meddled in inferior cultures. Others saw him as a visionary who had warned of threats the ruling families had refused to confront. The truth, as always, was layered. Thrawn had used the Empire as a proving ground, a vast laboratory to test his theories on power, unity, and decay. He had seen firsthand how ideology without discipline collapsed, how power without foresight bred weakness. His service to the Empire had never been out of devotion to Palpatine, but out of necessity. The Empire had been a means to a greater end, to preserve civilization against threats its rulers could not even imagine. But preservation came at a cost. In choosing to ally with tyranny, even temporarily, Thrawn had allowed atrocities to occur under his watch. He had calculated suffering against stability and deemed it acceptable. To some, this made him no better than the monsters he quietly opposed. To others, it made him the only sane man in a galaxy ablaze with madness. His greatest disciple, a Chiss tactician named Ziara, once wrote, "Thrawn's genius was not in seeing the future, it was in shaping the present so the future had fewer horrors." Whether she was right remained a matter of galactic debate. The final years of Thrawn's life remain cloaked in mystery. Rumors suggest he returned once more to the unknown regions, seeking to lead a coalition of species against the Grisk incursion. Others believe he died in secret, passing his command to a network of protégés who now operate in silence, guiding events in the shadows. What is known is that the Chimera, scarred but proud, was last seen patrolling the edge of wild space. Its hull marked not with Imperial insignia, but with a symbol adapted from both Chiss and Galactic script. Order born from understanding. Whether Thrawn lived or died matters little to his legacy. Across the galaxy, from core worlds to forgotten moons, his influence endures. In every calculated maneuver, in every commander's quiet study of enemy culture, in every effort to win wars with insight instead of destruction, there echoes the mind of a tactician who never truly left the board. Chapter 10. The Final Calculation. Thrawn's Place in Galactic History. Across the galaxy, few names inspire such divisive reflection as that of Mithra Narado, Thrawn. To some, he was the last noble voice within a brutal regime. To others, a brilliant monster who calculated morality into irrelevance. But to historians, tacticians, and observers of galactic fate, Thrawn represents something else entirely. A case study in the power of perspective, preparation, and restraint. His life intersected the greatest transitions the galaxy had ever seen, from the twilight of the Republic to the heights of Imperial tyranny, from civil war to fractured peace. Thrawn observed and adapted with a precision few could rival. He was neither Jedi nor Sith, neither revolutionary nor tyrant. He was a creature of order, of structure, a being who believed that knowledge was the first weapon and insight the sharpest blade. Unlike many historical figures whose legacy hinges on a single battle, a crowned victory, or a tyrannical rule, Thrawn's mark is found in doctrine, reform, and restraint. He rarely pursued glory. He rarely needed to. His presence in any campaign turned the odds. His knowledge of art, species, and psychology allowed him to win battles long before the first shots were fired. Where others required legions, Thrawn required understanding. He is perhaps most often compared to Grand Moff Tarkin, another strategist whose doctrine shaped the Empire. But where Tarkin weaponized fear, Thrawn cultivated loyalty through results. Where Tarkin built the Death Star, Thrawn built the TIE Defender program, choosing superiority of craft and pilot over terror. One believed in annihilation, the other in precision. His home, the Chiss Ascendancy, remained enigmatic even in his later years. While the Empire crumbled and the Republic was reborn, the Chiss watched from the darkness of the unknown regions, a people guided for a time by a man they did not entirely trust. Thrawn's time among the humans had changed him. He was no longer wholly Chiss, nor wholly Imperial. He had become something other, an emissary of reason in a galaxy of emotion. In death or disappearance, Thrawn left no monuments, no public graves, no titles passed on. His writings, some encoded in navigational algorithms aboard the Chimera, others scattered through academic institutions or encrypted within former Imperial archives, remain as cryptic as they are profound. Entire academies, both republic and independent, have made careers out of interpreting his tactical memos. In his study of art as a window into thought, has revolutionized military anthropology. The irony is sharp. A non-human, despised by many within the Empire for his origin, became its most effective leader. A man of thought and control navigated the chaos of galactic war with greater efficiency than any Sith Lord. And yet, for all his brilliance, for all his victories, he could not prevent the rise of the First Order, nor the fall of the Republic that replaced the Empire. Some say he never meant to. There are rumors, unconfirmed, that before the Battle of Exegol, encrypted transmissions were intercepted bearing the mark of Chiss encryption. Warnings, perhaps, or plans, a final move in a game that stretched beyond empires. If true, it would mean that even as Sith cults rose and Jedi legends were reborn, Thrawn was still playing the long game, seeking not dominance, but preservation. Thrawn never courted the Force. He did not kneel before it nor deny its presence. He acknowledged it as he did gravity or stellar drift, a reality to be calculated, not worshipped. He feared neither Jedi nor Sith, because he studied them both. He had faced Vader without flinching. He had watched the Jedi fall and understood why. In a galaxy often dominated by mystics and zealots, Thrawn remained the embodiment of reason. And so the question remains, what if more had listened? What if the Empire had adopted his teachings? What if the Ascendancy had empowered his vision? What if the Republic, reborn, had embraced his methods to prevent its own decline? Perhaps such questions are rhetorical. Perhaps they are the musings of scholars who admire the clarity of logic too much. But in the end, Thrawn's place in history is not bound to what could have been. It lies in what was. Child of the Ascendancy, a tactician of the Empire, a whisper in the unknown, and a shadow across every battlefield that followed. When starships gather in formation, when commanders pause to study the cultures of their enemies, when officers debate the value of knowledge over numbers, they invoke Thrawn, knowingly or not. And in that, Mithraniroto lives on. In silence, in thought, in strategy, forever calculating.